Good evening, community. I'm very pleased to be able to reach you once again, to be given the opportunity to bring you stories of encounters with the paranormal, to be given the chance that, story by story, you may know that the realm of the unexplained is more likely than you might imagine. Or do you truly believe that everything you cannot perceive with your five senses simply does not exist? Keep an open mind to all possibilities. Perhaps that is all you need to verify that the paranormal exists. Perhaps then, you will be the next protagonist of Tales of the Night. Hello, community. This is the second story I share with you. My name is Juan Luis Payan, from La Paz, Baja California Sur. I had promised to tell you this story, although it is a bit sad for me. It happened back at my house in the Cardenas neighborhood, where I used to live. I am the youngest of 6 siblings, and back then, Tere, my older sister, was 50. She lived in Cabo San Lucas because her partner was from there. The truth is, we knew little about her. We hardly ever saw her, and we didn't have much communication. But I do remember that day when she called, saying she was going to visit the family in La Paz, that she had a few days off. We were delighted that she would do that. One day before she arrived, as always in the early morning, I got up to use the bathroom. I have the habit of doing so between 3 and 4 a.m. When I came out of the room, heading to the bathroom, I saw that there was a person, a woman sitting in the living room. It startled me, but she looked like a normal person, not like a ghost or anything. So I said good morning to her. "Good morning," she replied. This calmed me down a bit, knowing it was nothing paranormal. I asked her if she needed anything or was waiting for someone. I wanted to know if someone from my family was with her and had left her there, or if she was waiting to leave at those hours with one of my brothers. She asked me if I was Tere's brother, and I said yes. She told me she had come to see her, that she was her friend. Oh, but she hasn't arrived yet. Maybe she got the time wrong and meant to say in the afternoon instead of 3 in the morning, I said. The woman told me to have a coffee with her, and of course, feeling embarrassed for her, I prepared 2 cups, and I sat down to listen to her there, in the living room. I remember she spoke slowly, but non-stop. She would tell me anecdotes that I gradually heard more and more, as if in a dream, dozing off. Until finally, I apologized, told her I was falling asleep, and that I had to go. She replied, "Thank you for keeping me company." When I woke up in the morning, I remembered her, but now it did seem completely illogical that someone had come to the house at those hours. I thought it had been a very strange dream, one of those that seem very real, but when I went through the living room, I saw the 2 coffee cups. The day, in the afternoon, my sister arrived. When I came back from work, my mom and she were chatting. I asked them if they had been at the house the night before, and they said no. My sister told me she had just arrived from Cabo. I told them about that visitor. I asked my sister if any of her friends had told her they would be there, that they might have gotten confused. I described the woman to her, and my sister started looking through the old photos on her phone. Photos so old that they looked like they were taken with those old, low-resolution phones. She finally got to a photo and stopped. She asked me if it was her. Yes, that's her," I replied. "She was even dressed the same way. She said she came looking for you. That's why I thought you had told her you were arriving today." My sister fell silent. Then she broke it to tell me that woman had died many years ago. I wanted to stick to the idea that it had all been a dream, a coincidence. But what I couldn't explain were the coffee cups. My sister returned to Cabo San Lucas to work, and days later, I heard my dad take a call. They were telling him something serious, something that worried him. And then he told my mom in a low voice so no one else could hear. My sister had undergone surgery and had a complication. They were bringing her to La Paz, and there, near home, she passed away 3 days later. I keep thinking about that visitor, that woman. It's a very strange coincidence if it was all a dream, and I wonder if that visit had anything to do with what happened a few days later. What do you think? In life, we all have incredible stories, anecdotes that someone could hardly believe with certainty. I know that, and I know how complicated it can be to believe, to even understand this story. But I feel that if I am to share it, it has to be here, with this community. It happened on a Saturday 10 years ago, when I was just a child. My family was very religious, and for obvious reasons, we would not miss Mass on a day like that. Before the Holy Saturday Mass began, it was common to bless the fire, and in the church we go to, there is a park next door where that blessing used to take place. It's a large park, with playgrounds and very, very tall trees. I remember they started gathering the firewood, and little by little they lit the fire. When everything was ready, it must have been around 7 p.m. Despite it not being late that evening, it was already completely dark. It was night. I was watching the children play in the park as the blessing began. But something made me look up at the sky. It was a starry night, and I always liked that. I suppose that's why I looked up there. I don't remember if there was any other reason, but up there, almost at the top of a tree, I noticed a silhouette that was standing, as if observing the ritual. Though it had no face or features, I felt it was watching us. That vision was so strange that the first thing I thought was that it was my imagination, that I was trying to find a shape for something that was up there. So I told my sister, who was 9 years old at the time, to look over there. I wanted her to tell me there was nothing. I wanted her to make fun of me. But she opened her eyes wide in surprise and asked me who was up there. I knew it wasn't my imagination, that there was something real. The fire blessing began. The priest started his prayers, and right at that moment, the silhouette moved very quickly, leaping to another branch of the tree in front. Then it jumped 2 more times, until finally the blessing ended. We then went in procession to the church, but my sister and I kept looking up, realizing that that silhouette was following us, walking along the highest branches, as if it were a monkey. It reached the tops of the trees where we saw it leap to others, moving away and disappearing into the night. Today we are older, but we still remember that story. The night of the fire blessing. We still remember what we saw on that Holy Saturday. My sister still describes it just like that, so we know we saw the same thing. At night, we still pass by that park, next to the church to get home. I always look at the trees, searching for it. I know there are very few chances, but if anyone has seen something like that, I would love to know. Good night. And well, in this episode, we have examples of people who listen to us. Those who, when they have already told a story and promised to keep talking, some do fulfill it. And people who, when they hear us say that something similar has happened to them, send us their experience. That is the case of Monica, who, from El Dorado, Sinaloa, shares her story with doppelgangers, with those doubles that, as we have seen, mean different things to each person. Spirits that go ahead, or bad omens, perhaps. Let's go to her story, and please, 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 if you are one of the people who has had an encounter with them, don't fail to share your experience with us. This is her story. Good evening, Uriel. Tales of the Night Community. My name is Monica Estrada, and I'm from El Dorado, Sinaloa, a township about 40 minutes from Culiacan. I want to tell you that for many years, I have followed your program. I usually listen to your stories while cooking and while knitting. Today I heard the story called Don't Look Out the Window. And in the last story, when a boy mentions that there was a double of his brother peeking out, they ask if anyone has had a similar event. Well, I had something very similar happen to me. I even told this story in a comment on the Facebook page, but I think it got lost among the many good stories told there. In 2021, my husband and I were in the process of expanding our house. He is a mechanic and had the workshop in front of our lot. We were building around the small rooms we had used to live in until then, since it was temporary. At that time, we had a room that was simultaneously the living room, kitchen, dining room, and another bedroom where we all slept, both connected by a door. It was around 8 p.m. when I was sitting on a couch near the door to the outside. I was waiting for my son and his father to return from the workshop to serve them dinner. Since middle school, my son, after school, would go to work with my husband, and he still does. I was knitting, very entertained while waiting, when the door opened. My son came in, took off the backpack he used back then, and left the keys on the table to go straight to the room. Before he went in, I asked him about his father, but he didn't answer me. He didn't even turn to look at me. He simply went into the other room and closed the door. I didn't want to say anything to him. I assumed he was tired or had gotten angry with his father. I even laughed, thinking that maybe he had arrived with an urgent need to use the bathroom. But 15 minutes went by and my husband didn't arrive. So I went to the bedroom to ask my son if he thought he was going to take long or if we should have dinner without him. But when I entered, only my daughter was there watching TV. I asked her about her brother, but she told me he hadn't arrived. I was surprised, but my distracted daughter was very focused on the TV. I told her that her brother had arrived about 15 minutes ago, but she insisted that at least he hadn't entered the room. I thought maybe he had gone straight to the bathroom, and that's why she didn't notice him. I went to knock on that door and asked him from outside if he was okay. But no one answered. I knocked again, and nothing. Finally, I opened the door, and to my surprise, the bathroom was empty. Without saying anything and trying not to let my daughter notice my fear, I returned to the living room completely puzzled. The only way to enter and exit the house was through the main door, and I was knitting right next to it. I sat back down on my couch in a shock that's hard to describe when I heard my son's characteristic footsteps, followed by the keys trying to open the door. He came in, took off his backpack, left the keys on the table, and headed to the bedroom. I, still somewhat shaken, asked him the same question I had a while ago. It was the only thing I could say. "And your dad?" "He stayed behind finishing a job. He'll be here in a bit." Before he entered the bedroom, I stood up and asked him very seriously, "Son, you arrived about 15 minutes ago." He didn't answer me, but he turned to look at me with a completely confused expression. "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear you arrived a while ago. You left your backpack and the keys. I asked you about your dad, but you didn't answer me. You went straight to the room. I thought you were angry or rushing to the bathroom. I swear, I was sitting right here." My son stayed with me for a while. We didn't know what to do, what to say. As I told him how everything had happened, I realized that whatever had entered before him hadn't made a sound. I didn't hear his footsteps or the keys at the door. In the end, I didn't want to tell my husband. That was on a Thursday, October 7th, 2021, to be exact. The following Saturday, I went to look after my mom at her house. Well, not exactly my mom, but my grandmother. But she raised me since my mom died when I was 3 years old. I hadn't gone to see her for a while due to family issues, and on Friday night, they asked me to go, keep her company so that my aunt, who lived with her, could go to a doctor's appointment, and I happily went. I arrived early. We spent the day together, and at one point in the afternoon, we sat down to chat. I told her what had happened to me a few days earlier, and that strange appearance of something that looked like my son. She listened to me very attentively, and when I finished, she told me, "Be very careful because those things, at least in this family, always mean bad news." I was very alarmed and told her not to tell me that if something was going to happen to my son. "No, daughter. Don't be afraid of that. It's almost never about the person who manifests, but it's always something bad about to happen. It has happened to me many times. I'll tell you about them later." Everything was left like that on that occasion. That night my aunt, the one who lived with her, arrived. I hugged her, kissed her, said goodbye, promising to come back more often. But that same night my aunt called me to tell me that my mom, my grandmother, was in the hospital. She had fallen in the bathroom. When I arrived and saw her, I knew it was serious. She couldn't move one side of her body. She could no longer speak. They transferred her to another hospital where they told us she had suffered a cerebral embolism. I was with her almost every day, and little by little she lost consciousness until she didn't wake up again. The following Thursday, a week after what happened at my house, was her last day on Earth. I saw her take her last breath, pass away. Her death was very hard for me because, due to things I can't recount and the pandemic, I couldn't see her for more than 2 years, despite living nearby that day. That day, when I went to look after her, it was magical. I cooked what she loved the most. My daughter didn't go to work and spent the day with us. My son came for lunch and was so happy to see her again that he stayed longer than he should have. He no longer even wanted to go back to work. We talked about everything. We laughed, we cried. It was as if those 2 years were suddenly present in a single visit. When the anniversary of her passing was approaching, several of my nieces, my daughter, my son and his girlfriend were at her house. We touched on the subject of Grandma, of the conversations, of her experiences, and above all, of her paranormal anecdotes that we loved to listen to so much. I began to recount, still with much pain, everything I had experienced on that last day. I spoke with her, how God, coincidence, the universe or destiny as you want to call it, had given my children and me that last day to live it with her. During that conversation, my son brought up the topic of his double. Then, I told them what she had told me in her own words. In this family, that always means bad news. It means something bad is going to happen. We fell silent and didn't comment any further, but it was clear that we all thought the same thing. Maybe the bad thing that was about to come was her death. This is my story, perhaps sadder than terrifying, but I hope it can be useful to someone. Thank you for staying here. Before moving on to the last stories of tonight, we remind you that you can subscribe to the channel on any platform where you are listening to us to always be aware of when a new episode is published. For now, it's time to continue, as there are still more stories tonight. This is the first time I share a paranormal story, if it can even be called that. The truth is, I don't understand what happened. I don't understand what is happening, if it's something caused by the spirits of those who are no longer with us, or by that which has never existed in a human form. On this occasion, I want to tell you about the night my cat spoke to me. My name is Fernando, and I'm sure that almost all of us have or have had a pet. A dog, a cat, or any little animal that has somehow served as a companion. I think almost all of us love animals, but that love can sometimes lead us to dark places. You love your pet, but could you be sure your pet loves you back? I try to distract myself on my computer, having a little coffee with music in the background while chatting with my friends in an online game. Time passes quickly if you entertain yourself like that. And that's what I want, for time to pass. I lost track of it and didn't realize when it was already 2 in the morning. Close to the witching hour, right? Well, that's what they say about 3 a.m., but I don't think that's the case. I don't like to believe in ghosts and dark beings. I'm still trying not to believe. But if they do exist, they must prefer those early morning hours if they try to torment someone. But I don't see why limit themselves to 3 o'clock. Tonight it's not ghosts that are keeping me awake, but my cat. That black cat that came into my life when he was very young, when he was just a few months old and I was only 12 years old. And lately, I've felt him different, as if he weren't himself. He observes me in a strange way and seems to listen to every word I say to him, as if he could already understand me. Right now, he's behind me, lying on my bed. I can feel his gaze watching every movement, and his gaze feels heavy, as if it were the gaze of an old person. I'm afraid that if I turn around, it won't be my little cat there, that he'll already look like something else. How could this happen, you'll ask? Distrust a little animal? Well, I suppose it all comes from a walk I took with him when I was taking him to the vet to buy some things he needed, and for his regular checkup. It wasn't a long trip, just a few kilometers, but he doesn't like to leave the house. The sounds of the cars on the main avenue bother him. He becomes violent. He is passive, playful, but every time we go out he tries to escape from my hands, sometimes succeeding, to go hide in vacant lots or abandoned houses. He ventures in so far that it's impossible to find him. And every time I give up, he ends up coming back on his own. Maybe that's a game for him. Maybe it was his way of having fun. On this last trip, when a truck made a very loud noise behind me, startling both of us, my cat leaped out of the backpack I was carrying him in. He went into an old house before disappearing from my sight. He's very scared. When he gets lost and climbs a tree or places where he can't get back on his own, he starts to let out a very high-pitched meow, as if asking me for help. That meow, which he repeated that day, while I stood in front of that house covered in graffiti, trying to guess which room it was coming from. I started walking around the house, afraid to go in, listening to that meowing calling me. Through one of the doors, I saw an opportunity to enter, but when I peeked in, I could see something that seemed to be a small altar. 3 candles about to burn out, photos of a person and a small dirty cloth doll in the shape of a cat or a dog, some kind of deformed animal. The smell coming from there was penetrating and unpleasant. I felt it had permeated all my clothes. I ran out of there. When I heard my cat again, I decided to run in a last attempt to reach him, and luckily his cry led me to an empty room where there was only a box with dirty rags. There he was, with some bones. Apparently the remains of an animal that I assumed my cat had been gnawing on. The meat seemed decomposed. I took him in my arms and we left. It was already night. Feeling dizzy and confused, I decided to go home. We would go to his appointment later. I arrived wanting to bathe, to take off everything I was wearing. I left my cat in the kitchen and took a shower. When I came out, he was on my bed, waiting for me. It was strange because I had left the door to my room closed, and also because he was lying with his face very high, looking towards the bathroom door as if expecting me to come out through it. It's strange because he's not usually like that. How had he gotten there? My cat is small and a bit silly. He's not intelligent enough to manage to open a door, as I've seen some others do. I wanted to think that one of my sisters had opened it for him, that he had meowed for them to let him in. I turned on the computer to play for a few minutes and then continue with my chores. But that's when I remembered there was no one at my house. There was no one who could have opened it for him. I couldn't concentrate on the game. I set about doing my pending chores, but I kept thinking about how the hell he could have gotten in. There was something that made me feel deeply uneasy. I finished my chores. I saw it was only 10 o'clock. I couldn't go to sleep. I didn't want to feel alone, and I messaged a friend to see if he could play with me for a while. He replied yes, and online we started playing until 1 a.m. when I couldn't anymore, even though I didn't want to disconnect, to come back to reality. When I turned to the bed, my cat wasn't there anymore. The door was still closed. I got up to check everywhere and the cat wasn't there either. I heard a purr. My cat was on the cabinet next to my computer. How? How did I not hear him jump up there? How had he gotten there without me seeing him? The room was dark, and because of my cat's color, he was hard to see at times, so I decided to believe it had simply been an oversight on my part. "What a fright you gave me, silly cat," I told him, and I took him out of the room to try to sleep. But a while later I woke up. A voice could be heard, a voice murmuring deeply outside my room. That seemed very strange to me, especially at that hour, because no one in my house has a voice like that. I got up to approach the door and try to listen to what it was saying. I stood behind it. I couldn't understand. I opened the door. There was no one there, but the voice seemed to be coming from the kitchen. I headed over there quietly, and although I didn't understand what it was saying, I did manage to recognize certain words. Words I've heard in movies. Words in Latin. Lux, Requiem, Tenebris. They're not in a sequence. Those are simply the ones I was able to recognize. I decided to peek in very slowly, opening the door just a bit to discover who was there, who had entered the house. But there was only one silhouette. A figure I recognized. Only my cat was there. The voice stopped. Suddenly, my cat turned towards the slightly open door.
"I know you're there."
I ran out of my house. I left without caring about anything. I arrived at a friend's house a few blocks away. It had been months since I had spoken to him, but I knew I could hide there. I knocked on his door and managed to wake him up. He asked me if everything was okay, and I told him no, that I couldn't explain anymore, but to let me stay there. Without asking anything else, he did. Days have gone by and I'm still wondering what is happening. I don't know where my cat is, but this thing that is here is not him. I feel like I need to go back to that house to look for him again, but I'm afraid to think that now this one, that is here, this cat, no longer greets me when I arrive. He just watches me from behind the door, always from the darkness. He looks at me in a different way. Today precisely. He is sitting here on my lap, watching the screen with me, watching what I'm writing, almost as if he could understand it. At night, sometimes I hear laughter, mockery. I wonder if it's him celebrating that he has managed to take the place of my pet. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't understand it myself. Maybe I have gone insane. Time will tell. If anyone has any idea what is happening to me, what I can do, believe me, I will be reading you. Thank you for listening, community, and may this story serve as a reminder to take good care of your pets. Remember to take extra care of black puppies and kittens, who are less often adopted, and also because evil people want them for other things, for other practices which are not worth mentioning. To animals of this color, take good care of them, and also take care of animals that, due to their appearance or because of people's beliefs, are still very mistreated, such as opossums or barn owls. These are extremely important little animals for our environment that suffer greatly, truly greatly, from the actions of humans. Thank you for listening. Take good care of yourselves. This has been Tales of the Night.